Christmas Eve was supposed to be sacred, filled with warmth and laughter, not betrayal. I am 68, and after 40 years of sacrifice building my company, I thought I had earned peace. But that night in Newton, one look in my eldest son's eyes chilled me more than the snow outside. I never imagined the glass he raised, the pen he pressed into my hand, and the whisper I was never meant to hear would turn our family celebration into the fight of my life. Stay with me, because what happened that Christmas will make you wonder if you truly know the ones sitting at your own table. Snow was falling heavy that Christmas Eve, the kind that muffled every sound and made the streets of Newton look like they belonged in a painting. From the wide windows of my house, I could see the glow of lights strung across the hedges, the big spruce tree in the yard sagging under the weight of ornaments and snow. Inside, warmth and chatter filled the rooms. The fireplace crackled, the scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon filled the air, and voices overlapped as family and a few close friends moved between the dining room and the living room. I stood near the mantel with a glass of bourbon, letting the burn remind me I was still alive. Still the man who had built coal global exports from scratch 40 years ago. At 68, I had earned my rest, but nights like this stirred up memories I tried to quiet. The years of sacrifice, the nights on the road chasing contracts, the weight of payroll on my shoulders. It all sat heavy in my chest. Tonight was supposed to be about family, not the company. Yet even as I looked at my children, the lines of business and blood blurred too easily. Daniel, my oldest, leaned against the wall with his wife Rebecca, both dressed to perfection, as if this gathering were a board meeting rather than a holiday dinner. He was 38, ambitious, sharp, and lately colder than the weather outside. I noticed how he scanned the room, nodding at relatives, but not really seeing them. His hand rested on Rebecca's back in a way that seemed rehearsed. She gave him a quick glance, her phone lighting up in her palm before she slid it back into her purse. I tried to push down the unease rising in me. Eddie, my younger boy, was near the piano with his daughter Emily, laughing at some tune she tried to play with clumsy fingers. At 34, Eddie was the gentler one, a professor at Harvard, content with books and his family. He never cared for the cutthroat side of business. Watching him, I felt a sting of pride and regret mixed together. The dinner table groaned under platters of ham, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and pies waiting their turn. Laughter erupted when my brother-in-law cracked another bad joke, and for a moment, I let the warmth settle. These were the moments my late wife, God rest her soul, had always dreamed of. She loved Christmas more than anyone I knew, and since she passed, I tried to keep that spirit alive. But then Daniel rose from his chair, tapping his glass with a spoon. The room quieted, heads turned, and he smiled, lifting his wine toward me. His voice carried that confidence that always rubbed me raw. "To new beginnings," he said. "To changes that will make our family stronger." The words landed strangely, and I caught myself tightening my grip on the glass. New beginnings. Changes. My heart skipped, though no one else seemed to notice. They clapped politely, sipped their drinks, and returned to conversation. I watched Daniel take his seat again, his eyes flicking to Rebecca, and something unspoken passed between them. I tried to focus on the children running through the hallway, their laughter echoing against the walls. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was tired and too suspicious. But deep down, I knew the look in Daniel's eyes was not about family unity. It was something else, sharp and hungry. Later, as we moved to the living room for presents, I caught Rebecca slipping out toward the kitchen, phone in hand. Her voice was low, almost drowned by the music, but I saw the way her expression hardened. When she returned, she smiled too brightly, slipping her arm through Daniel's. I wanted to confront him right there, demand to know what he meant by changes, by new beginnings, but the weight of the room held me back. This was Christmas, and I was the patriarch. I forced a smile, listened to Eddie explain a book Emily had given him, and pretended my heart wasn't tightening with dread. Still, the thought gnawed at me as I watched Daniel laugh at a cousin's joke, his arm around Rebecca, the light from the tree glinting in his eyes. Something was shifting. and though the fire blazed and the house rang with joy, a cold shadow settled in my chest. I told myself to enjoy the night, to put aside suspicion until tomorrow. But the words Daniel had spoken echoed in my mind, refusing to let me rest. And as the snow piled higher outside, I had the sinking feeling that this Christmas would be remembered not for warmth, but for the chill that crept into my bones. The music swelled again, and someone urged me to open a gift, but my gaze stayed fixed on my eldest son, watching him whisper something to his wife. I did not hear the words, but I saw the smile thin and deliberate, and it was enough to know that peace would not last. Daniel clinked his fork against the rim of his glass again, a sharper sound this time, and voices faded into silence as everyone turned toward him. He rose with a kind of ease that came from knowing he had the floor. His shoulders squared, his smile practiced. In his other hand, he held a stack of papers neatly clipped together. And for a moment, I wondered why anyone would bring business into a Christmas gathering. "Father," he said, lifting his wine toward me, "I want to toast to you, to your legacy, to all you've built, and to the future we're about to secure." Applause scattered around the room. Relatives nodded, glasses lifted. I forced a smile, though something inside me twisted. He stepped closer, laying the papers on the side table beside my chair, as if it were nothing more than a formality. "Just a quick signature," he murmured softly, leaning in so only I could hear. "It will take 2 seconds. You'll thank me later." I frowned, setting down my bourbon. "What is this, Daniel?" He waved a hand lightly, still smiling at the room, never breaking the facade of cheer. "Just routine paperwork. A bit of consolidation to make things easier for you. Nothing to worry about." Rebecca appeared at his side, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Her eyes were warm to the crowd, but when they shifted to me, they were cold and fixed. She nodded toward the papers. "It's just so you don't have to stress about details anymore, Richard." I felt my heart thud harder, not from the words, but from the way my vision seemed to blur around the edges. The fire's heat pressed against my skin, yet I felt a chill crawl over me. I blinked, trying to focus, but my hand trembled when Daniel slid a pen into my palm. "What's in this?" I managed, my voice rougher than I wanted. He bent closer still, the smile on his lips. "Trust me. It's only structure. A little shift so you can rest." The room around us carried on. My niece passed out cookies. Someone cranked up the Christmas carols. Laughter spilled across the room like none of them saw the storm building at the center. I stared at the blur of letters on the page. My head grew heavy, my body sluggish like a tide pulling me under. "You don't have to read it all now," Daniel whispered. "Just sign, Dad." I wanted to push it away, to stand up to shout that I was not a fool, but my fingers felt like stone, and the eyes around me, smiling oblivious, pushed me towards silence. Daniel guided my hand to the line, the pen scratching across paper in a slow, unsteady scrawl. "There," he said softly, as he whisked the papers back. "That's done." Rebecca squeezed his arm, her lips curving into the faintest smile. My stomach turned as she glanced down at the papers, her nails tapping once against the stack before she tucked them into her clutch. Applause broke out again when someone started a carol in the next room, and the moment dissolved into holiday noise. I sank deeper into my chair, the glass of bourbon heavy in my grip. The taste was off-bitter in a way I hadn't noticed before. My head pounded and the light from the tree seemed too bright, stabbing at my eyes. Daniel lifted his glass once more, addressing the crowd with the same charm that had fooled too many people over the years. "To family," he declared. "To loyalty, to growth, and to a future where our name will shine brighter than ever." The crowd cheered, glasses clinked, voices rose in harmony. I sat in silence, my pulse drumming in my ears. My hand still tingling from where I'd held the pen rested on my knee, like it belonged to someone else. Eddie leaned over from across the room, smiling, as Emily tugged at his sleeve, begging him to open the gift she had wrapped. For a fleeting moment I thought to call him, to draw him close to whisper what had just happened. But the weight in my chest pressed me down, and I stayed quiet, watching as Daniel tucked the signed papers away, as if sealing a deal no one else needed to know about. The music swelled. The children laughed and Christmas carried on around me. But inside I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. My vision blurred again, the room tilting just enough to make me grip the arm of the chair. No one noticed. They were too busy unwrapping gifts, too busy singing along to Bing Crosby, too busy believing this was another joyful holiday. I looked across the room at Daniel. He leaned close to Rebecca, his lips near her ear. I could not make out the words, but I saw the glint in his eyes, the way her mouth curved in satisfaction. My heart clenched, my body weak, and I knew with a terrible certainty that something far larger than a holiday toast had just been set in motion. The pen lay cold in my fingers, the signature drying on paper I had not truly read, and the night pressed on as if nothing had happened at all. Thomas appeared at my side just as the last of the wrapping paper was being swept from the floor. His steps were quiet, careful, and when he leaned close, I could feel the weight of his hesitation. He had been with our family more than 30 years, a man who never spoke unless it mattered. His voice was low, almost a whisper, meant only for me. "Sir, I saw something tonight." My head still throbbed, but his tone cut through the fog. I turned toward him, my mouth dry. "What is it, Thomas?" He glanced toward the hallway to make sure no one was listening, then back at me. "Your son poured something into your glass before he handed it to you." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. The music in the background, the chatter of cousins playing with toys. It all seemed to fade, my breath caught in my chest. "What did you just say?" "I saw it with my own eyes," he said firmly. "He waited until you were distracted, then tipped a small vial into the bourbon. I should have spoken sooner, but I did not want to cause a scene in front of the family." The glass on the table beside me suddenly looked different, menacing. My fingers trembled as I set it aside. A cold sweat broke across my back, and the dizziness I had felt earlier crashed back with brutal clarity. My own son. Thomas touched the back of my chair lightly, a gesture of steadiness. "Keep the glass. Do not let it be taken away. If anyone asks, I will say I set it aside for cleaning." I nodded slowly, my heart pounding so hard I thought others might hear it. Across the room, Daniel was laughing with Rebecca, his hand resting on her waist. They looked like a perfect couple to anyone else. But to me, they looked like conspirators who had already begun to bury me alive. I rose carefully, the room spinning as I did. Thomas stayed near, steadying me as I excused myself from a group of relatives who barely noticed my departure. In the quiet of the study, away from the clamor of Christmas cheer, I sank into the leather chair and pressed my palms to my temples. Why would he do this? I muttered more to myself than to Thomas. "He has been restless for months," Sir Thomas answered softly. "Talking in hushed tones with his wife, meetings at odd hours. I could not prove anything until tonight." The weight of betrayal settled on me like a stone. Memories of Daniel as a boy flooded my mind, his hand in mine on his first day of school. The pride in his eyes when I showed him the company's first warehouse. All of it clashed violently with the man I had just seen smiling while slipping poison into his father's drink. The door creaked, and I looked up sharply, but it was only Eddie. He poked his head in his daughter, clinging to his leg. "Dad, are you okay? You look pale." I forced a smile that felt brittle. "Just tired, son. Go back and enjoy the party." He lingered a moment, his eyes narrowing as if he wanted to ask more, but finally he let Emily tug him away. When the door closed again, I exhaled, the room spinning slower, but no less heavy. Thomas set the glass carefully on a side table, his eyes meeting mine. "This should be preserved. If you choose to fight, you will need it." I leaned back, my breath uneven. The fight was already inside me, burning hotter with every passing second. But I said nothing more, letting the crackle of the fire fill the silence. Out in the hall, Daniel's voice carried smooth and confident, weaving through the walls of the house I had built. Each word was like a nail hammered into the coffin. He thought he was preparing for me. I stared at the glass on the table, the liquid dark and still, and knew the night had just shifted into something I could never turn back from. The morning came with a dull ache pressing behind my eyes. Light pushed through the curtains of my bedroom, too sharp, too accusing. I sat up slowly, the weight in my head reminding me of what had happened the night before. The glass, the papers, Thomas's whisper. None of it had been a dream. I moved to the mirror and studied my reflection. My skin looked gray, my eyes bloodshot. I splashed water on my face, but it did nothing to wash away the sickening thought that my own son had tried to weaken me in my own house on Christmas night. Downstairs, the smell of coffee drifted up. The house was quieter now, relatives packing their cars, children's laughter fading into the yard. I walked carefully into the kitchen, where Thomas was already tidying. He met my eyes and gave the smallest nod. The glass from last night sat sealed in a plastic bag on the counter. "Keep it safe," I said, my voice hoarse. "Of course, sir." Before I could say more, Eddie walked in wearing a worn Harvard sweatshirt, his hair messy. He poured coffee, glancing between us. "Dad, you sure you're all right? You looked rough last night." I forced myself to take the mug Thomas handed me. "Just tired. Long day." Eddie frowned. "Daniel mentioned you signed some papers, said it would help streamline things at the company." My stomach twisted. I gripped the mug harder, staring into the steam. "What did he tell you exactly?" He shrugged. "Just that it would keep the business moving without burdening you." He sounded proud, like he had finally proven something. I nodded slowly, keeping my face still, though inside I was boiling. Eddie gave me a searching look, as if he wanted to press, but then Emily called from the living room, and he left to join her. When I was alone again, I whispered to Thomas. "He already told people. He is making this official." Thomas set his jaw. "Then you must act quickly." My phone buzzed on the counter. A number from the company's Boston office flashed across the screen. I answered, and the assistant on the other end spoke briskly. "Mr. Cole, we received the documents Daniel submitted last night. They are being processed. Your son informed us it was your decision." The room tilted slightly, rage and fear mixing in my chest. "Thank you," I said tightly, then hung up. My hands shook so badly, I had to set the phone down. I sat at the kitchen table, my mind racing. He had wasted no time. While I slept, he was already claiming my life's work. The betrayal felt deeper with every second, a knife turning in the wound. Later that morning, Eddie stopped by again. He leaned against the doorway, his expression uncertain. "Dad, can I ask you something? Go ahead." Why do I feel like there is something more going on than just paperwork? Daniel is walking around like he owns the place. Rebecca keeps whispering to Henry Wallace on the phone. None of this feels right. I looked at him, at the son who had chosen books and classrooms over corporate halls, the one who never seemed interested in power. My throat tightened. "You are right to be suspicious, but you must let me handle this. Do not confront your brother, not yet." Eddie hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Just be careful." He left, and I sat in silence, my coffee cold. Outside, snow continued to fall, quiet and relentless, covering the driveway in white. Inside, the walls of my house felt closer, as if they knew secrets I could no longer ignore. I spent the afternoon in my study, rifling through old contracts and board agreements, trying to understand just how much damage Daniel's paperwork could do. My hands lingered on the framed photos of the early days of coal global exports, when I had one truck and a dream. Each photo was a reminder of nights without sleep, of deals fought for tooth and nail, of sacrifices that had cost me friendships and my health. And now, with a single poisoned glass and a signature, Daniel wanted to take it all. By evening, the phone rang again. Another call from the office, this time more formal. "Mr. Cole, we need your confirmation for the transfer. Daniel said you might not be available directly, but protocol requires your verbal approval." My chest tightened. I forced my voice steady. "Tell them no changes are to be made until I review everything personally. Do not process anything further." There was hesitation on the other end, but finally the assistant agreed. I hung up my heart, racing. I looked out the window at the snow-covered yard. The lights from last night still hung on the hedges, but the joy had drained from them. The glow now felt hollow, mocking. I clenched my fists, vowing silently that if Daniel wanted war, then war was what he would get. Yet even as anger flared, the ache of betrayal pressed harder. I could not erase the image of his smile, the ease with which he had placed the pen in my hand. A father's love does not vanish overnight, but mine was being tested in ways I never imagined. When night fell again, the house was almost empty. Only Thomas moved quietly through the halls, steady as always. I sat in the dim light of the study, the bagged glass on the table beside me, and let the weight of it settle on my shoulders. The world outside was frozen and silent, and inside my heart the same cold silence spread. What I did next would decide not only the company's future, but whether my family could ever be called a family again. The next morning I drove into Boston with the bagged glass sealed in a box on the passenger seat. The snow along the Charles River was gray now, slushed down by salt and tires, and the city felt harsher than usual. I parked outside a brick building in Back Bay, where my old friend and attorney Linda Morales kept her office. She opened the door herself when I knocked, her sharp eyes softening for only a second before she ushered me inside. "You look like hell, Richard," she said, motioning me toward a chair. "Tell me everything." I laid the box on her desk, then sat down, feeling the weight of the past 2 days drag me lower. Daniel slipped something into my drink on Christmas night. Thomas saw it. Then he shoved papers at me, papers I signed while I could barely hold a pen. The office already called said they had the transfer. Linda's face hardened. She pulled the bag out of the box, carefully setting the glass in the light. "This is evidence, Richard. We need to get it tested immediately." She dialed a number, speaking quickly to a contact she trusted at a private lab. When she hung up, she leaned forward. "They can run a tox screen. If there is anything in here, we will have proof." I nodded, my chest tightening with both relief and dread. "What if it comes back clean?" I asked quietly. "Then we fight another way," she said without hesitation. "But Richard, I believe you, and I do not say that lightly." For the first time since that night, I felt something shift inside me, a faint thread of strength returning. I pulled from my coat an envelope of copies I had gathered from the study. Contracts, bylaws, board minutes. Show me how much power he really has now. Linda scanned them, her brows knitting. "If what you signed is a full transfer on paper, Daniel can claim majority control. But if we prove fraud or incapacitation, we can void it. What worries me is timing. He will move fast." Her words lit a fire in me. Daniel had always been impatient, cutting corners, taking shortcuts. He thought charm and force could replace hard work. I should have seen this coming years ago. Linda slid the documents back across the desk. "We need more than a test result and a butler's word. We need motive patterns, something that shows this was deliberate." I thought of Rebecca slipping into the kitchen with her phone, of Henry Wallace's sudden appearances at family gatherings. I clenched my jaw. He is not acting alone. "Then we follow the trail," Linda said, her voice steady. "But Richard, you must stay calm. No confrontations yet. If you tip your hand, they will bury everything before we can prove a thing. On the drive back, I kept replaying her words. Stay calm. No confrontations. But the anger inside me was raw, scraping at every thought. At home, the house felt colder. The decorations wilted and sad. Thomas met me at the door, watching my face for answers. She believes me, I told him simply, and she is moving fast. That night I tried to eat, but food turned to ash in my mouth. I wandered the halls, stopping by the portraits of my family hanging above the staircase. Daniel at 10, his hand clutching a baseball glove. Eddie at 12, beaming with braces and awkward shoulders. My late wife smiling between them. I touched the frame, my throat thick. How had we come to this? The following morning, Linda called. I have the preliminary report. They found benzodiazepine in the glass. Enough to impair motor control. My knees went weak. Proof. Richard, she continued, this is strong evidence, but it will not be enough alone. We need to secure witness testimony. Thomas is critical. But we also need to show Daniel's intent. If we can link him to meetings or communications about seizing the company, we will have a case. I looked across the room at Thomas, who stood silently by the window. He gave a small nod as if he already knew his role. I will testify, he said firmly, whatever it takes. Later that day, Eddie dropped by again, Emily trailing behind with a stuffed rabbit. He looked uneasy, his eyes darting toward me. Dad, people at the office are whispering that Daniel is taking over. He told them you wanted to step back, that you were too tired. Is that true? I felt heat rise in my chest. That is what he told you. That is what he told everyone. Eddie said, his voice low. But I do not believe him. I studied my younger son, the sincerity in his face. Eddie had never been one for the business, but he had a clear sense of right and wrong. He set a hand on Emily's shoulder, steadying himself. If you need me, I am with you. The words caught me off guard, pricking tears I had been holding back. I swallowed hard, nodding. Then keep your eyes open, and tell me anything you hear. As night settled over Newton, I sat in the study once more, the snow outside piling higher, the silence of the house wrapping around me. The evidence was real. The allies were gathering, and yet the mountain ahead loomed larger than ever. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand steady for the first time in days, and told myself there was no turning back now. The next move would have to be mine. The following afternoon, I drove into Cambridge, telling Thomas I needed some air. In truth, I needed a voice that was not tangled in the mess of lawyers and boardrooms. The old cafe on Mount Auburn Street had not changed much in decades. The same brass bell over the door rang when I walked in. The same smell of strong coffee and baked bread filled the air. Behind the counter stood Olivia Parker, her hair silver now, but her eyes still sharp as ever. She looked up surprised, then smiled. Richard Cole? Well, I will be damned. Sit down before I drop this tray. I managed a smile and slid into a booth by the window. She brought over 2 mugs, steaming hot, and set one in front of me. Her hand lingered just a moment, the familiarity both comforting and painful. You look like you have not slept in a week, she said gently. I took a sip, the bitterness grounding me. Maybe longer. Her gaze softened. You always carried the weight of the world. Even back when we were kids, you thought you had to fix everything. I stared out at the street, the snowbanks gray and heavy. Maybe I never learned how to stop. She waited patient, as always. Finally, I spoke. Daniel is trying to take everything from me. Not just the company, everything I built. He drugged me on Christmas Eve, slipped something in my drink so I would sign papers. Olivia's breath caught. She set her mug down, her hand trembling slightly. Richard, that is monstrous. I nodded slowly. Linda has proof from the lab, but proof is not enough. He has Rebecca whispering in ears, Henry Wallace backing him, and a board that sees only profit. Her face tightened. Henry, I should have guessed. That man always thought he deserved more than he earned. I leaned closer, lowering my voice. I do not know if I have the strength to fight them all. She reached across the table, her hand covering mine. You built that company from the ground up. Do not tell me you have nothing left. You have more fight in you than anyone I know. The warmth of her hand stirred something in me, a reminder of the man I once was before grief and betrayal wore me thin. Memories flickered of long summer nights when Olivia and I had been inseparable before life pulled us in different directions. For a brief second, I wondered what my life might have been if I had chosen differently. She gave my hand a squeeze, then let go. You need to be smart, Richard. They will underestimate you if you let them believe you are broken. Use that. I finished the coffee and felt steadier. Outside, the world still looked bleak, but inside me, a plan began to form. On my way home, I pulled into a gas station and called Linda. I told her about Henry and Rebecca, that Olivia had confirmed her suspicions. Linda's voice was brisk. Then we need to watch Henry's movements. If he is colluding, there will be a trail. Back at the house, Thomas met me at the door. He had overheard Rebecca earlier on the phone. She was careful, but he caught enough. She mentioned a meeting with Henry downtown tomorrow afternoon. Good, I said more firmly than I had in days. We will be ready. That night, I could not sleep. I walked the halls again, pausing at my wife's photograph on the mantel. I whispered to her, telling her what had happened, telling her I would not let Daniel destroy the legacy we built together. In the morning, I dressed in a suit I had not worn in years, the fabric a little tight across the shoulders. I looked at myself in the mirror, older, but not yet finished. I had battles left in me. Thomas drove me into the city, parking a block from the hotel where the meeting was scheduled. We waited in the car until we saw Rebecca step out, coat pulled tight, phone pressed to her ear. Moments later, Henry appeared, his gait slow but purposeful. They greeted each other with a familiarity that stung. I lifted the small recorder Linda had given me. We needed their words, not just suspicions. Thomas and I followed at a distance, careful, until we found a spot near the lounge where they sat. Through the crack of the door, I could hear snippets. Henry's voice low but clear. Once Richard is out completely, we can restructure without interference. Rebecca's reply was sharper. He is already out. The papers are signed. He will not fight back. He is too tired, too old. I clenched my fists so tight my nails bit into my palms. Thomas rested a hand on my shoulder, steadying me. I forced myself to keep still to let the recorder capture every poisoned word. When they rose to leave, I stayed hidden, my pulse racing. I had enough now to bring to Linda, enough to show intent and collusion. Driving back through the winter traffic, I felt the anger still burning. But for the first time, it was mixed with something else. Resolve. That night in the study, I played the recording back. Each word was a dagger, but each dagger was also a weapon in my hand. I leaned back in the chair, the fire crackling low. And for the first time since Christmas, I allowed myself to believe I might win this. Outside, the snow kept falling, muffling the world in silence. While inside my house, the evidence of betrayal played on repeat, filling the room with a cold clarity I could no longer deny. The next day began with a heaviness that had nothing to do with the weather. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wood grain, the recorder from last night resting in front of me like a silent judge. Thomas set a plate of eggs down, but I pushed it aside untouched. Food had lost its taste. All I could think about was Daniel moving in shadows, already convincing people I was finished. By mid-morning, the phone rang. Eddie's voice came through low and uneasy. "Dad, I need to see you. Can I stop by?" When he arrived, his face was drawn, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. He paced the length of the study before speaking. "Something's not right at the office. I heard Daniel talking with one of the finance managers. He was handing out envelopes, big ones like bonuses, but the timing made no sense. Everyone looked nervous. My jaw clenched. Payoffs. He was buying loyalty, tightening his grip. Eddie looked at me torn. "Dad, I don't know what to do. He is my brother, but the things I am seeing, it feels wrong." I studied him, this son who had always stood apart from the business, who valued books more than boardrooms. Yet here he was, caught in the undertow. I lowered my voice. "You have to decide, Eddie. Family is not blind loyalty. It is standing for what is right, even when it is hard." He swallowed, then nodded slowly. "If you need me, I will stand with you." The words settled deep in me, warming a place I had thought frozen. For a moment, I felt less alone. Later that afternoon, Thomas found me in the hall. "Sir, I must tell you something," he hesitated, then continued. "I overheard Daniel yesterday. He was speaking with a contact from overseas. He intends to sell a portion of the company's shares to an outside investor quickly, before any challenge can be mounted." The room tilted for a second, my hand gripping the banister. "So he wants to cut me out entirely, not just of control, but of legacy itself." Thomas nodded gravely. "He believes time is on his side." I pressed my palm to my forehead, trying to quiet the storm in my mind. Every hour he was moving faster. I could feel him closing in, locking doors I had once opened with my bare hands. That evening, Eddie returned with a folder. He laid it on my desk. "I thought you should see this." It was an internal memo Daniel had circulated to a select group. In it, he positioned himself as the sole decision-maker for a pending partnership with a European distributor. He claimed my health was declining and that I had voluntarily stepped aside. My chest burned as I read the words. Declining health. Voluntarily stepped aside. Lies written in black ink spread like gospel to people who had trusted me for decades. Eddie's voice shook. I didn't want to bring this, but I couldn't sit on it. I looked at him, at the conflict in his eyes, and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing. Never doubt that." As night settled over Newton, I walked through the silent rooms of the house, my thoughts echoing against the walls. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of sacrifices made. The photographs, the awards, the etched silver frame that held my wife's smile. All of it stood as proof of a life poured into building something real. And now my son was feeding it piece by piece to men who would strip it for parts. I returned to the study where the recorder and the folder lay, side by side. Proof of betrayal, proof of intent. I poured a glass of water, my hand steady despite the storm inside. From the hallway, I heard Thomas's quiet voice speaking with Eddie. Their tones were hushed, serious, carrying the weight of men who knew the world was shifting. I stayed still, listening to the faint rise and fall, and let the knowledge sink deeper into me. The walls of my house felt tighter, the air heavier, as if even the building knew the lines had been drawn. I sat back in the chair, the fire crackling low, and let the certainty wash over me. Daniel was not simply reckless. He was deliberate, cunning, and willing to destroy everything if it meant wearing the crown alone. I looked at the folder one last time before closing it, the sound sharp in the silence. The storm outside rattled the windows, but it was nothing compared to the one gathering within me. I rose before dawn, the house still wrapped in silence. My mind would not let me rest. The documents Eddie had brought, the recording of Rebecca and Henry, and the poisoned glass were no longer just fragments. They were weapons, but weapons needed to be aimed. I pulled on my coat and drove into the city, the streets slick with fresh snow. Linda met me at her office. her hair pulled back her desk, already covered in files. She studied my face as I laid the folder and recorder in front of her. "You look like a man ready to fight," she said quietly. "I am," I answered. "But I need this done right." She played the recording, her eyes narrowing as Rebecca's voice filled the room. Then she scanned the memo Eddie had given me, her lips pressed thin. "This is exactly what we needed. Fraud, conspiracy, coercion. And if the lab report holds up, we can build a case strong enough to bring before the board and in court." I leaned forward. "Daniel will not wait. He is already moving to sell shares overseas." Linda nodded. "Then we cannot wait either. But Richard, understand this. Once we show our hand, there is no pulling back." I felt the weight of her words, but nodded anyway. I was past the point of retreat. When I returned to the house, Thomas was waiting with news. "Sir, I overheard another call. Daniel believes you are finished. He thinks the papers make him untouchable." "Good," I said, surprising even myself. "Let him think that." That evening, Eddie came by again, his face pale but his voice steady. "Dad, he is planning a meeting with foreign investors this week. He asked me to attend his family, but I refused." He looked at me like I was a traitor. I studied my son, pride and sorrow mixed in equal measure. "You chose right, Eddie." That took courage. He hesitated, then added. He said something else. He said you would not be alive much longer to interfere. The words hit like a blow. My chest tightened, and for a moment the room seemed to tilt. Not just betrayal, but malice. My own son speaking of me as if I were already in the ground. Thomas's face darkened as he listened. "Then it is settled," he said grimly. "You must strike first." That night we laid out the plan. Linda would gather the documents and file an injunction to freeze any attempted transfer. The toxicology report would be sealed and notarized. The recorder would be duplicated, one copy for the board, one for the authorities. I looked at the faces around me, Linda on the phone. Thomas steady at my side, Eddie watching with quiet determination. For the first time I felt not just anger, but clarity. This was no longer about fear or shock. It was about reclaiming what was mine. The next morning, Jacob Sanders came by, his uniform heavy with snow. He shook my hand firmly, his eyes serious. "I heard from Linda. You have evidence of poisoning. If you want it logged, I can make sure it is secured properly." I led him to the study where the glass, still sealed, sat on the desk. He lifted it carefully, his expression unreadable. "This will go in evidence. No one touches it until the lab confirms the chain of custody." "Thank you, Jacob," I said, my voice low. He studied me for a moment. "Richard, you know this is not just a family squabble anymore. This is criminal." "I know," I replied. When he left, the house felt different. Quieter, yes, but charged with purpose. I paced the study, the fire crackling, the folder open again in front of me. Each page was another nail in the coffin Daniel thought he had built for me, but this time, they would seal his fate instead. By nightfall, the snow outside was thick again, the world blanketed in white. I sat with Thomas, both of us silent, listening to the wind against the windows. My thoughts were heavy but sharp. I no longer saw Daniel as my son in those moments. I saw him as the man who tried to poison me, the man who lied to steal my life's work, the man who spoke of my death as if it were a calendar event. I rested my hands on the folder, feeling its weight. The fight was coming closer now, and I would be ready when it arrived. The summons arrived 2 days later, printed on heavy paper with the Coal Global Exports logo across the top. Daniel had called for an emergency board meeting to be held at the downtown Boston office. The language was formal, but the intent was clear. He wanted to cement his control and parade it in front of every shareholder. I sat at my desk, staring at the letter until my knuckles whitened. Thomas stood near the doorway, his expression unreadable. "When is it?" he asked. "Friday morning," I said flatly. "He thinks I will be too weak to show." Thomas gave a firm nod. "Then we make sure you walk through those doors first." Eddie arrived later that evening, his face pale but determined. "Dad Daniel has been bragging at the office. He says the board will recognize him as the sole CEO by the end of the week. He invited investors from Europe to sit in." I felt the heat rise in my chest, not from fear this time, but from anger sharpened into steel. Let him bring them. Let him show off. When Friday came, the city streets were choked with slush and impatient horns. I dressed in my best gray suit, the one my wife had always liked, and tied a deep blue tie with careful fingers. Thomas drove Eddie in the back seat, all of us silent. The tall glass building loomed against the gray sky as we pulled up. For the first time in days, I felt something close to calm. Inside the boardroom, the air buzzed with tension. Daniel stood at the head of the table, Rebecca beside him, Henry Wallace in a tailored coat just behind. They looked like a triumphant trio, confident and ready. Conversations hushed when I entered. Several heads turned surprised, a few even relieved. Daniel's smile froze when he saw me. "Dad, you look, well, better than expected." I walked slowly to a seat halfway down the table, never breaking eye contact. Better than expected indeed, I thought, though. I kept my mouth closed. Rebecca leaned in to whisper to him, but I caught only fragments. He shrugged her off and raised his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here to formalize the transfer of authority. My father has chosen to step back, and as majority shareholder, I will take the reins moving forward." Murmurs rippled through the room. A few nodded politely, others shifted uneasily. I sat still watching. He clicked a remote, and the screen behind him, lit with slides, numbers, projections. He spoke with practiced confidence, promising growth expansion, international partnerships. His words filled the air with gloss and charm. But I noticed the flicker in Henry's eyes, the greed too transparent, the eagerness too rehearsed. Eddie caught my gaze across the table. His jaw was tight, his hands clasped, but he stayed quiet. Finally, Daniel spread his arms. "With this vote today, we move into a new era for coal global exports." Before anyone could respond, I cleared my throat. The sound was rough, heavy enough to still the room. I rose slowly, letting the silence stretch, until every eye turned. Daniel's smile tightened. "Dad, this is not the time." "It is exactly the time," I said, my voice carrying more strength than I felt. "You have all heard promises tonight, but you have not heard the truth." Rebecca shifted in her seat, her knuckles whitening around a pen. Henry frowned, tapping his watch impatiently. I rested my hands on the table. Last week on Christmas Eve, I was drugged in my own home. My son handed me a poisoned drink and forced my hand on documents I could not read. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Daniel barked a laugh, sharp and forced. "That is outrageous. My father is confused, unwell." I let the noise settle, then reached into my briefcase. Linda had prepared everything sealed and ready. I pulled out the toxicology report, the notarized copies, and laid them flat on the table. "Evidence." The board members leaned forward, eyes scanning the words. I continued steady now. "There is more. Recordings, witnesses, proof of collusion with outside investors." I looked directly at Henry, who paled slightly. His lips pressed together, his confidence draining. Daniel's voice rose desperate. "This is nonsense. He is spinning lies because he cannot accept change." I held up a hand, silencing him. "If you doubt me, listen for yourselves." I pressed play on the recorder. Rebecca's voice filled the boardroom, cold and clear. "He is already out. The papers are signed. He will not fight back. He is too tired, too old." Gasps rippled around the table. Henry shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting to the door. Daniel's face flushed crimson, his mouth opening and closing without words. I paused the recorder and looked around the room. That is the respect my son and his wife have for me. That is the truth behind this so-called transition. The room hung in stunned silence. Some members avoided Daniel's eyes, others whispered to each other. The illusion had cracked, and everyone could see the rot beneath. I sat down slowly, my heart pounding, but my voice remained even. The decision you make today will not only decide the future of this company, it will decide whether this board stands for integrity or corruption. The silence stretched thick and heavy as every man and woman in the room realized the weight of what had just been placed before them. Daniel pushed back his chair and stood, the sound screeching across the polished wood floor. His voice rose above the murmurs, brittle and sharp. "This is ridiculous," he barked, stabbing a finger toward me. "My father has lost his grip. He is sick, he is confused, and now he is trying to drag us all down with him." The room quieted, waiting for my reply, but I said nothing. I simply looked at him, letting the silence stretch until he grew uneasy. His anger filled the space, and the more he spoke, the more he exposed himself. Rebecca leaned forward in her chair, her voice smooth, too rehearsed. "Richard, you know you are tired. You told us so yourself. All you have to do is let Daniel handle things. This is the natural course." Her words made bile rise in my throat. Tired, yes, but not blind. Not helpless. Not drugged into obedience without a fight. I straightened my shoulders and laid the toxicology report in the center of the table. One of the directors reached for it, scanning quickly. His face drained of color as he read the line that confirmed the presence of benzodiazepine in my drink. Gasps rippled down the table. Daniel laughed, but it was too loud, too forced. "You cannot possibly believe this. It is fabricated." He gestured wildly, his voice cracking. "My father probably had a prescription, or maybe he took something and forgot." I rose to my feet, leaning forward, my palms pressed flat against the table. I have never taken a sedative in my life. That drink was tampered with, and the man who handed it to me is standing right there. Eyes turned back to Daniel. His face flushed crimson. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, the door to the boardroom opened. Thomas stepped inside, his suit impeccable, his posture unshakable despite his years. His presence drew instant respect. Many of these people had seen him at company events for decades, always a quiet fixture in the background. He spoke clearly, his voice carrying across the room. "I was there on Christmas Eve. I watched Daniel pour a substance into his father's glass before he gave it to him." The room erupted. Some board members leaned forward, whispering furiously. Others sat frozen, shocked into silence. Daniel slammed his fist on the table. "You are lying. You are nothing but hired help." Thomas did not flinch. "I have served this family with honesty for more than 30 years. I know what I saw." For a moment, no one breathed. Then I pulled a small device from my briefcase, set it on the table, and pressed play. Rebecca's voice spilled into the room, recorded clear and undeniable. "He is already out. The papers are signed. He will not fight back. He is too tired, too old." The words cut through the tension like a blade. Board members shifted in their seats, their faces a mix of disgust and disbelief. Henry Wallace paled, tugging at his tie. I fixed my eyes on him. "Henry, would you like me to play the part where you promised to back Daniel in exchange for a larger slice of the company?" His mouth opened, then shut. He looked down, his hands trembling slightly on the table. Daniel's fury boiled over. "This is a setup," he shouted. "You all see it. My father has manipulated the servant, the lawyer, even my brother. He cannot accept that his time is finished." Eddie, who had been silent until then, pushed back his chair and stood. His voice shook at first, but grew steadier as he spoke. That is not true. I have watched you, Daniel. I have seen the way you twist people, the way you hand out envelopes to buy loyalty. I wanted to believe you were better, but you are not. The boardroom froze. Eddie rarely spoke in these matters, preferring the quiet of academia to the cutthroat corporate world. His words landed with weight because of that. He looked around the table, his eyes clear. My father may be older, but he is not weak. He is not delusional. He is the man who built this company, and you tried to poison him to steal it. Daniel's hands shook. He pointed at Eddie, his voice raw. You are betraying me. You are siding with him over your own brother. Eddie did not flinch. I am siding with the truth. Silence again, heavy and suffocating. The chair of the board cleared his throat. His hands folded tightly. We have heard enough. He looked down the table, his voice firmer now. The evidence presented is serious, and the allegations are grave. We cannot proceed with a transfer under these circumstances. Daniel's face twisted with rage. You cannot do this to me. I am the future of this company. Without me, you are nothing but relics. He reached for the stack of papers he had brought, but no one moved to support him. Rebecca tried to lean in, her whisper sharp in his ear, but even she seemed rattled by the tide turning against them. I remained standing, my gaze steady on the people I had known for years. This is not about age or ambition. It is about integrity. Decide where you stand. One by one, eyes turned away from Daniel. Some looked down at the table ashamed. Others met my gaze with quiet nods. The illusion had shattered, and the truth lay bare. Daniel's breathing grew ragged, his fists clenched. He looked like a man cornered, stripped of the armor he had thought impenetrable. The board chair finally spoke again, his voice low but final. We will recess to review all documentation and testimony. No decisions will be made tonight. The gavel struck, once the sound echoing off the glass walls. Chairs scraped as people rose, some leaving quickly, others lingering with wary glances. I stayed still, my hands resting on the back of the chair before me, my heart pounding, but my expression controlled. The storm had broken, but its fury was not yet spent. Daniel turned to me, his voice a venomous hiss meant only for my ears. This is not over, old man. I did not reply. I only met his glare, steady and unyielding, until he finally looked away. As the room emptied, the evidence still lay scattered across the table, stark against the polished wood. Papers, reports, recordings, and the truth itself no longer hidden in the shadows. I gathered my things slowly, each movement deliberate, as if marking the moment in my memory. I had cracked the mask he wore so proudly, and the board had seen what lay underneath. When I finally stepped out into the cold Boston night, the city lights glinting off the snow, I knew the battle was far from finished. But for the first time in a long time, I felt the ground firm beneath my feet. The next morning, the newspapers were already buzzing. A headline in the Boston Globe hinted at turmoil inside coal global exports, mentioning rumors of an internal struggle for control. No names were printed, but I knew it would not take long before Daniel's allies began spinning their version of events. I sat in the kitchen with coffee that had gone cold, the paper folded beside me. Thomas placed a hand on the chair, quiet, as always, his presence grounding me. Eddie walked in, his face pale, phone clutched tight. Dad, he said, you need to hear this. He set the phone on the table and pressed play. It was a recording someone had leaked, Daniel's shouting from last night's board meeting. His voice was distorted, but recognizable, raging about being the future, calling me weak, calling the board relics. Eddie's eyes were wide. It's spreading online. People are already talking. I leaned back, letting the weight of it sink in. Daniel had wanted power so badly, he never realized how quickly it could slip once the mask cracked. By noon, my phone rang. Linda's voice came through brisk and sharp. "Richard, the board is rattled. Some want to vote immediately to remove Daniel from all authority. Others want to wait until legal proceedings catch up. You need to be ready for both." I told her about the leak. She sighed. It might work in our favor. Public trust matters, and Daniel has just burned his. That afternoon, I drove back into the city. The streets were still slick with snow, the air biting cold. Inside the office lobby, tension buzzed like static. Employees looked at me differently, whispers trailing behind as I passed. Some offered nods of respect, others kept their eyes low, uncertain which way the wind would blow. In the boardroom, Daniel was already there, pacing his tie loose, Rebecca whispering frantically at his side. Henry sat further down, his face drawn and gray, the arrogance drained out of him. When I entered, the chair of the board called for order. This meeting is to discuss interim leadership while matters are reviewed. The words hung heavy, deliberate. Daniel slammed his palm against the table. "This is outrageous. I am the rightful CEO. I hold the papers." I spoke calmly, placing my hand on the folder I carried. "And those papers were signed under duress while I was drugged. Evidence has been presented, testimony given. This company deserves better than a thief at the helm." Rebecca shot me a look sharp enough to cut. "You cannot prove anything beyond doubt. The board knows the risks of siding with a man your age against progress." Before I could reply, Eddie stood. His voice carried a quiet strength. "Enough. I have watched this from the inside. Daniel bribed employees. He manipulated reports, and I will testify to all of it." The room went still. Even Daniel's face shifted, surprise breaking through his fury. He pointed at his brother, his voice raw. "You would betray me for him." Eddie's jaw tightened. "I am not betraying you. You betrayed yourself." Murmurs rippled through the board. The chair cleared his throat. "We cannot ignore this any longer. A vote must be taken." Daniel shouted again, desperation spilling over. He stormed down the table, waving his arms, his words tumbling into incoherent rage. The more he spoke, the clearer it became to everyone watching. He was not a leader. He was a man unraveling. I stayed silent, letting him burn his own bridges. Finally, the chair raised a hand. "All those in favor of suspending Daniel Cole from his duties pending investigation, raise your hands." One by one, hands lifted. Some hesitated, but in the end, nearly every person in the room raised theirs. Daniel's face twisted, a mix of shock and fury. He turned on Rebecca as if expecting her to conjure a rescue, but she looked away. The gavel struck once. "It is decided. Effective immediately, Daniel Cole is suspended from all executive authority." The words echoed through the room. For a moment, no one moved. Then Daniel lunged toward me, his voice breaking. "You think you have won. You will regret this, old man." Security stepped in quickly, pulling him back. His shoes scraped across the floor as he fought, shouting curses that bounced off the glass walls. Rebecca gathered her purse, her face pale, and hurried after him. Henry slumped in his chair, unable to meet anyone's eyes. I exhaled slowly, my hand steady on the table. The storm that had been building for weeks had finally broken wide. But as the board began to shuffle papers and murmur about next steps, I knew the battle was not truly over. Daniel's words still rang in my ears, bitter and venomous, a promise that this fight would spill beyond boardrooms and into whatever shadows he had left to crawl through. When the meeting adjourned, I walked out into the corridor, Eddie at my side. For the first time since Christmas Eve, the air felt lighter, though my chest still carried the weight of what lay ahead. Outside, the sky was gray, the wind sharp, but I felt the sting less than before. The company had turned its back on Daniel. The truth had taken root. Yet deep in my gut, I knew his fury had not spent itself. The cold hit me as the glass doors swung open, the city stretching wide before me, and I braced myself for what was still to come. Snow was still falling when I reached the curb, flakes landing on my shoulders and melting into the wool of my coat. The city around me moved on, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside I knew a chapter of my life had closed and another had begun. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I felt the burden in my chest lift just enough for me to breathe. Eddie walked beside me in silence, his collar pulled up against the wind. When we reached the car, he finally spoke. "Dad, it is over. You stood your ground." They saw who he really was. I nodded, though I kept my hands clenched in my lap as Thomas drove us back toward Newton. It was not over. Daniel's rage would not vanish with one vote. But the truth had been laid bare, and the board had chosen to stand with me. That was enough for now. At the house, the Christmas lights still hung along the hedges, now sagging under the weight of snow. I stood for a long moment at the door before stepping inside. The warmth of the fire greeted me, the quiet of home, wrapping around my shoulders like a blanket. That evening, Linda arrived, her briefcase in hand, her tone brisk, but her smile genuine. "Richard," she said, "you did well. The suspension will hold. The evidence is solid. Daniel will face legal consequences." I poured her a cup of coffee, the kind we had shared through decades of contracts and late nights. For once we spoke not only of business, but of life. Of what it meant to build something from nothing, and then watch those you loved most try to tear it apart. She reminded me that survival itself was a kind of victory. Later, after she left, I walked through the quiet halls of the house. The portraits on the walls seemed different now, less like accusations, more like memories. I paused at the photograph of my wife, her smile soft and steady, and whispered that I had kept my promise. I had protected what we built. The next morning brought clarity. With Daniel removed, the company needed a new direction. I met with the board again this time, in calmer tones. We discussed restructuring, restoring trust, and protecting the workers who had feared for their jobs. I spoke with a strength I had forgotten I still possessed. Eddie attended not as an heir to power, but as a son standing beside his father. His words carried weight, and for the first time I saw him not just as the quiet professor, but as a man willing to shoulder responsibility. Henry Wallace resigned that same week. His silence during the meeting had sealed his fate. Rebecca disappeared from public view, her calls unanswered, her alliances evaporating overnight. As for Daniel, the last I heard, he was lashing out, blaming everyone but himself. The courts would deal with him. Back in Newton, life slowly returned to rhythm. Thomas continued his quiet routines, the steady presence I had leaned on through it all. One evening I told him plainly that he was no longer just a servant, but family, and I meant every word. The gratitude in his eyes said more than thanks ever could. Weeks passed and the snow began to melt. I found myself walking more, breathing in the sharp winter air that slowly softened into the promise of spring. Neighbors waved. Strangers nodded with respect when they recognized me from the papers. It did not inflate me. It humbled me. One Sunday afternoon, I sat in the living room with Eddie and little Emily. She climbed onto my lap with a book, and I read aloud until her eyes fluttered closed. Eddie watched quietly, then said, "You know, Dad, she will remember this. Not the meetings, not the headlines. She will remember that you stood up for what was right." His words struck deeper than he knew. Perhaps that was the true legacy, not the company, not the wealth, but the example set in moments of crisis. That night, alone in the study, I picked up a pen and began drafting a new will. This time there would be no ambiguity. The company would pass only to those who had proven loyalty and integrity. No one would ever again twist my signature against me. I sat back listening to the quiet creak of the old house, and for the first time in weeks I felt at peace. On Christmas Eve, I nearly lost everything. My son, my name, my legacy. But in the end, I gained something I had forgotten. The knowledge that strength does not vanish with age, and that truth, once revealed, has a power stronger than any scheme. I lost a son that night, but I gained back my dignity, my company, and the respect of those who mattered most. And as I looked out the window at the last snow of the season, I knew I had kept the one promise I made to myself. I would not let betrayal define me. If you stayed with me through this story, tell me what you think. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted most? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more stories like this, and stay with this channel. There are many more tales of family betrayal and resilience waiting to be told.